Hello, you are listening to Houston Toad Politics on the University of Houston's CoogRadio station. I'm Mikey Gonzalez, and today I'm joined with a very special guest, Josh, aka Ettingermentum, on Substack. He has a pretty big following in the politics scene on Substack. He writes about electoral analysis and electoral politics from a left-wing perspective. I followed his work probably since the 2022 midterms when I knew you were right and everyone else was doubting me, which unfortunately gave me a bit too much trust in 2024. But honestly,
No.
I think it could have gone either way. I don't think you were that off
Yeah,
base.
yeah. Yeah. Everybody else had it 50-50. I was right about the Biden stuff though, so I'll
All right, so I mostly wanted to bring you on because you had a recent article that's about basically you thinking that 2026 is the Blexas year. And as someone
yeah.
who, my first election I ever voted in, because I was old enough to vote for, was the Beto versus Cruz election.
Hmm.
I've lived in Texas my whole life. I kind of grew up with the idea it's always going to be a red state, and maybe that's still true.
Yeah.
Um, but that was the first election for me where it actually seemed competitive, and the results. I think people still try to deny the results, or not deny the results, but kind of make it seem like that environment wasn't there when it was.
Yeah.
So I have a couple questions about your article, and also just recent polling. The first question I have is, I know there was some new Pew Research polling, and then just polling in general over the past couple months about Hispanic support for Trump and how it's basically just completely obliterated and plummeted.
Yeah.
What do you think the effect of that would be on a 2026 midterm in Texas?
Yeah. Well, there was I think like my friend Lakshaya Jain, who writes for The Argument and does polling for them, he has been on he like has his own data and kind of pointed this out. The 20 and just to kind of go back and to just for some context, the 2024 election was kind of a tale of two elections where you had a lot of shifts among the um, demographics that people wrote a lot about, the young voters, non-white voters, especially Latinos and Asians, and with um, different segments of the population. And this was something that I tracked early on in polling. It was the case in 2022, and it was noticeable after 2022. And the way that the polling was done is that there was not a lot of movement. There was a lot of stagnancy with educated white older voters. They were largely staying as Democratic, just kind of maybe a point or two less Democratic as they were in 2024. And we saw in the results that this really reshaped the map. It made the Democratic coalition a lot more efficient. They lost 6 points nationally. The national environment from D plus 4.5 under Biden to R plus 1.5 under Trump. But they didn't lose too much support in the white northern swing states where that were very close in 2020 and 2016. I think Wisconsin went from being the closest swing state in the 2020 election to being still the closest swing state in the 2024 election. It only moved towards Trump by about just under 2 points. The same was true in well, it was true to a lesser extent in Michigan and Pennsylvania, but they moved towards Trump by less than the country at large did. And we saw in states like Texas, Florida, California, New York, New Jersey, even Massachusetts, these more diverse, urban, dense states, there were major shift towards Trump. And this really seems to put Texas off the map in that election. It went from voting for Trump by 5 to 6 points in 2020 to voting for him by 13 points in 2024. There's these major shifts among Latinos across the state in urban areas, Harris County, the more mid-sized, largely Latino cities, like San Antonio and El Paso, and on the Rio Grande Valley, very famously, Trump is winning. He totally flips the region and he wins counties that had voted Democratic since the 1890s and 1910s or 1900s. So this is Texas seems to it seems like the map is reshifted in a way where the future for Democrats is kind of older and whiter in a way that people kind of didn't expect. And I remember, I think Ohio was bluer than both Florida and Texas were in 2024, and that seems like we have this kind of like it's this very ironic state of affairs where these like demographics that liberals really kind of gave up on and kind of like villainized to a certain extent and kind of like said that they didn't really need to care about because of this incoming demographic majority looked like they were really the last bulwark for the Democrats. And there's this plausible sort of situation coming in the Trump 2.0 over the past, like at the start of last year, where it looks like if Democrats are going to be winning a majority, like in the Senate in 2026, it'll looks like it will come through the North, through states like Ohio, maybe Iowa. I know in 2024, like the really close Senate seats were in Ohio and Nebraska and like Montana, all these white older states, while they weren't even coming close in states like Florida and Texas didn't have a Texas did have they yeah, they didn't come as close in Texas as they did in either of those three other white states. So there's this idea that you kind of it's just like this very kind of ironic and fun little um like kind of bizarro world where you have the woke white people, the woke older people and the more chud right-wing younger and non-white people, and that seems to put Texas off the table. Texas is really the main like question here, the main prize. There aren't too many largely Hispanic states that are liable to really swing that haven't either been voting Democratic already or Florida, which are like have really been kind of written off and forgotten by people for like a variety of reasons. But what we've seen over the past year is that those same demographics that didn't swing at all in 2024, the white voters who held out relatively better for Democrats or maybe even swung towards Harris a little bit, like in some counties in the North, those voters, like after not moving in 2024, they haven't moved much this year either. They haven't really they don't really disapprove of Trump by much more than they did when he came in. They haven't really shifted towards Democrats by much more than they did like after at the start of the administration. I think like Shia said, their vote like their numbers are kind of in accordance with what you'd see from
Oh, hello.
like a D+2 year, which would really be a disappointing midterm for them. That wouldn't be a wave. That would still be basically a split result. But what he said with non-white voters, with Hispanics and Asians and young voters, these really swingy, traditionally Democratic demographics, they're voting like it's a D+12 year. They've shifted away towards Trump by a lot. This is just kind of a reflecting sort of your initial question. But I do think that it makes sense for this to happen. I think that it's real. I think you're seeing like kind of anecdotal evidence of it. If you want, like everybody looks at like TikTok or Twitter now for proof of political trends, and like you saw a lot of people talking about Prop 50 as a form of like Latin pride. I don't, and but beyond like kind of that element of it, that's kind of just like the younger base that like, was already opposed to Trump. We heard during the 2024 election these people were primarily like open to Trump because of the economy. There is this idea that the economy did much better under him. People tried to make it into this big cultural ideological thing that it never really was, and now they're shifting away. And we've seen that in polling. We've seen his numbers are like back to where they were during his first term, or even as bad as 2016. And we saw in the election results in Virginia and New Jersey and California that there was a major shift towards Democrats among those groups. And it wasn't just a like people have tried to downplay it by saying, "Oh, it was those were lower turnout elections." The people who are like really disillusioned and swinging, they are like so low turnout they don't even vote except in presidential races. I don't believe that because there were a number of cities where the Democrats running for office this year outright got more votes than Harris did. It would have been impossible for them to either not have won some Trump voters or to have like maybe turned out people who didn't vote before. And on the other side of it, like we're talking about a midterm election next year. It may or may not mean too much for a presidential election, but if there is this kind of secular shift towards Democrats just on the basis of being a down battled election, something that doesn't really like matter. I'm not secular. This kind of just like vestigial or like fluky sort of thing, like how Al Red won a number of Trump counties, probably just based off of down ballot lag. That down ballot lag will still be taking effect in 2026. So as far as Texas goes, it'll still be very relevant.
Hmm. That was kind of the impression I was getting was the I mean I think we've seen this shift from like low propensity voters towards the Democratic
Hmm.
Party, especially I think when Trump is in power. There's always this reaction of like, why is this going on? And it's like, well, we know why
Yeah.
this is going on, and the only way to slow it down is to weaken his base of support electorally.
Yeah.
Um, so I think people will get very negatively polarized against him. Something that you brought
Hmm.
up in your article was that Ted Cruz underperformed Trump himself.
Yeah.
And at least from my anecdotal experiences and people I knew and people my family knew, was that um, I knew that there were quite a decent amount of conservative people who would show up and just vote Trump for president. Like they're not interested
Yeah.
in, and maybe because calling them conservative isn't the right idea, but they're just interested in President Trump. And then I personally know had friends who, whether just being just general disillusion with the Democratic Party or Gaza, who they went and they voted for Colin Allred, but they didn't vote for president. So
Yeah.
I think the just 2024 presidential candidate fiasco of us watching Biden slam into a wall for a year and then only really switching candidates when it's too late to have any sort of democratic election around who's going to represent the party line. I think it kind of created
Yeah.
a lag of motivation that I think switching to Harris probably helped it be less bad than it was going to
Yeah.
be, but
Yeah.
the
We did
damage was
see
already
that
done.
during. Yeah, we did see that during the election, where her biggest gains that she made after she switched in were among the kind of low propensity. Like it was, I think that one of the largest predictors of if somebody would switch from voting like not supporting Biden to supporting Harris after she came in was if somebody watched TikTok. So there, it could have been far worse than it actually was among that kind of like low propensity demographic that everybody's very interested in. And we did see this. There was a real effect. I couldn't find the source for it, so I didn't reference it in my article. But I do remember that, particularly among election day voters in Texas, that was in like urban areas. Election day voters are most likely to be the lowest propensity because if you're just voting on the final day, you're probably not like too super engaged compared to early voters. That was when there was the highest proportion of Al-Red Trump, nobody else voters. Those were the places where Alred outperformed Harris the most. So there is already this big um, demographic of people in Texas who might have supported Trump before, but weren't necessarily on board with the GOP as a whole.
Hmm.
And part of that comes down to Cruz being this perennial underperformer. He's never done well in any of his races. And Alred was on paper this strong candidate. He'd won in a suburban district around Dallas a number of times before. So there might have been, but again, Cruz was an incumbent who was well known in the state, and he just failed to win over a lot of these people. So there is this level of disillusionment with the GOP, even among Trump voters back then, that is just, it's gotten so much worse, and it really extends to Trump now. And that, I don't want to say that 2026 is the year of Blexas. I kind of just wanted to make the case that it could, because really I had to recalibrate a lot of what I was thinking about. Like after the elections this month, I was willing to believe that Democrats were struggling in the way that the polls said that they were struggling. They had unpopular leaders. They haven't really um, effectively. They hadn't seemed to effectively position themselves as an opposition party. They hadn't seemed to really break or move on from Biden in a way that successful opposition parties had done. And I was willing to think, okay, 2026 can be this sort of it might be set to be a disappointing year. This isn't the Democratic Party of 2018. They don't have the aura or the kind of reputation they got from Obama back in 2018. They're working with a kind of a losing hand of their own now, and they may not really recognize that. So I could see it being kind of a mediocre D+3, D+4 year. And then you have the results in New Jersey and Virginia, where the party is substantially underestimated in polling. I think there was an 11-point polling error in New Jersey. Overall, you see them doing well, with these demographics, making these major rebounds, just numbers that are totally consistent with a really strong blue wave year across the board. And this is the point that I really make in the Texas article. They do so in these circumstances where you would not think that Democrats would be the situation on paper or in these gubernatorial races was not ideal for them. They had an unpopular governor in New Jersey that they needed to run in the like kind of off of his legacy. That was difficult. In Virginia, Youngkin was popular, and Republicans were running a statewide winner who had won in 2021. That was also like not the ideal circumstances for them. And we did see, at least in New Jersey, there was an effect where was that traditional kind of ticket splitting demographic of wealthy, socially liberal, fiscally conservative voters who did split their tickets between voting for Harris last year and voting for the Republican for governor this year. So there was that effect in these states. In Virginia, it might have been a little diluted because the suburbs were very, very strong for the Democrats in that race. There wasn't really that kind of ancestral Republican vote. There's not really too much of an indication that Young can like directly help with any demographic there because Republicans just did so poorly. But at least in New Jersey, we can see that these are not like the perfect like situations for Democrats. And I don't think that this is proof that local politics doesn't matter anymore. I think that it really does matter. There's still some evidence that it did have an impact in these races. So the question is, what do you do when you go from these two states that aren't really the most fertile ground for Democrats? These are gubernatorial races. They're seats where Republicans have historically had a bit of an edge among certain kinds of voters in off years compared to federal years. I don't think at any point during the Trump era, Virginia and New Jersey ever voted particularly blue in their governor elections. These are just not like the most fertile ground for the party on paper by any stretch of the imagination. So what happens when you go from there to a state like Texas, where the Republicans are the incumbents, and based on recent polling, might be the ones who are the drag on their party and creating a tough local situation for them? Because we've seen in recent polling that Abbott has very suddenly become as unpopular as he's ever been, and I can't really provide my reasons for that. I don't live in Texas, but it seems to create kind of an inverse situation from these circumstances where Democrats were already doing really well. And like even if you just transmuted, you just totally extrapolated the direct shift from that was in we saw in Virginia and New Jersey on the Texas, it wouldn't be enough to flip the state because it's just so red. You could move Texas 10 points to the left and it would still be a couple points red on average. But um that was all with like an unfavorable local circumstance where an office where Democrats haven't always like done their best. So Texas could be like a totally like things could be totally wide open there in a way that it even wasn't this month. And I think that part of it is what I talked about, where the white voters and the older voters have not shifted really in any direction either way, like since Trump's election or really over the past number of years. That makes winning in states like Ohio and Iowa a lot more difficult if you're not really kind of keeping older voters as Democratic relative to the country, white voters as Democratic relative to the country that you had in 2024. So the party really may not have a choice but to go for Texas under such an environment. It's not, and I think that there is like kind of a case that this could really be the time just because of how dramatic the shifts were that we saw this month. It was really, really strong shifts away from the right.
Yeah, I with the Abbott being underwater in the polls. I know you said you couldn't really touch on that because you don't live here. For me, at least, like, I'm kind of surprised that he's underwater in general, just because he never has been. He's always been like a strong candidate. The stuff
Yeah.
I don't know. As a Texan, the stuff that I think is probably putting him underwater is there's been a lot of crackdown in terms of like academic freedom with like professors in the
Hmm.
state, especially like I'm an alumni of Texas A&M, and like they're just like they've fired a professor for just like mentioning trans people in this like book
Hmm.
in this book, and it became a huge deal. And like he appoints people to the college board of regents that kind of make these decisions. I'm in grad school now, and it's very clear like professors are just like scared to just like teach their classes like regularly. I know that they passed a bill recently in the legislature to like completely limit like professors' ability to like work from home. Um,
Hmm.
so those are at least the kind of stuff I'm running into now. I think also I think there's a level of it of this kind of like not with most conservatives, but I think there's a level of kind of rejection of big tech from like a small subsect of kind of more conservatively minded people that I think might be pushing them away from Abbott in the way that he's kind of just like gone all in on Tesla and a lot of these like tech companies trying to move into Austin. And I know that bubble's like kind of pop. Like a lot of those companies, these like not foreign, but like from other state transplants, like moving to Austin, like, oh, this is our, big tech city or whatever, and it just not working out for them. Like I know Austin used to have like a really big like housing shortage problem, and it's kind of been fixed because a lot of the tech companies just like they're not doing what Abbott thought they were going to do. They're not growing the economy in the way that they planned for. I think another element that I see, at least from kind of polling that I've seen in the past, like Hispanic voters seem to be like more culturally conservative, but like more fiscally liberal usually. And
Yeah.
I think kind of watching some of these like social safety nets like get taken away like in real time with the Republican Party. I mean, you won't believe the amount of people I've spoken to who are like Hispanic and are like, oh, mass deportations like didn't mean like what Stephen Miller's doing. It's like they didn't
Yeah.
like there's this like, oh, it's just the criminals that are supposed to be taken out. And I think there's just like
Yeah, that's a very common sentiment.
a ton of like misinformation about what the Republicans Party's platform on immigration actually is. And I think when you've got people like Stephen Miller talking on TV, and you've got Laura Loomer tweeting out that I mean, there was a thing, she tweeted something about alligator Alcatraz. It's like, oh, we can feed all the alligators with the exact amount of Hispanic population. It's like, I don't know how you can see that and even be like even if you're not like woke, see that and be like, oh, this is the party that we need to give more power to.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, but I guess in your theoretical Blexas, is the path to Blexas through like retaining suburban white voters and like higher turnout, or through flipping
Yeah.
Hispanic voters, or even just having
Yeah, I
like
think
disenfranchised, or not disenfranchised, but like just unmotivated like conservative Hispanic voters with
yeah,
Trump.
the unmotivated voter thing. I mean, I live in Georgia. That was a whole thing here. This idea that you can activate this large mass of non-white and young voters who hadn't voted before, and you can totally change the state. That was Stacey Abrams' whole bit. She really lucked out by the fact that white voters in the state, suburban educated whites, really started shifting left at around the same time she said she would turn the state blue. Here, like the state has become blue as the non-white proportion of the electorate, at least the black proportion of the electorate, has actually gone down relative to past elections. So the idea, I think, and we did see in 2024 where we did get that big surge of young and non-white voters who hadn't voted before, and they largely voted pretty Republican. It's like this kind of brutal irony for a lot of liberal hopes. I think, but with Texas, if you were to like the map, it would. I think Alred is very interesting because he did do particularly well compared to Harris among Latino voters in like the Rio Grande Valley or in the cities. But he also did flip two. He won two suburban counties, I think, like Tarrant County, I think, where Fort Worth is, and he won this one county north of Austin. That's like the suburban area. Both of those were Biden counties that Harris lost. And it does that does show that you don't. It's not really an and or thing. They would definitely. I think it's kind of funny because but the whole question here is the Hispanic population. Obviously, the gains any Democrat running for Senate would make to win the state would have to be disproportionately concentrated among Hispanic voters. We did see that. That was how Alred was able to outrun Harris by so much. He outran her by like a full 5 points. But you do need to pair that with like kind of extensions on suburban strength that Democrats really were hyped about in 2020 and 2022. But in like kind of, I think the really kind of underrated story of the election, the suburban swings that everybody was kind of taking for granted as this thing that would go on forever didn't really materialize in 2024. A lot of suburbs really shifted to the right that year slightly, and that was a big reason why Trump won. The encouraging, so that kind of, if you're talking about like this America A or America B, like one America is just very polarized and doesn't really shift all that much ever since like January 6th or so. That is a bit concerning for Democrats, like because it implies that their strength in the suburbs might already be maxed out. like if you're a suburban Republican and you stuck with Trump through all of the past 10 years, there's not really much that'll really like push you away compared to 2020 when stuff was really new. The argument against that, I think, and would be what we saw in Virginia, where the suburbs really did lead the charge for Democrats. The D.C. suburban areas, those areas are the largest swings in the state, and Spanberger achieved some suburban margins that no other Democrat had really achieved in Virginia ever. That kind of presents this world where, oh, maybe the gains aren't totally like maxed out, and which I think that it still is, because in 2016, even though Democrats lost, they did see these major gains in the suburbs. There was this idea that even if we're not like as well liked, like if it's a split election or we're losing support elsewhere, we can still make gains with these areas. In 2018, 2020, these gains continue. 2022, they kind of max out in some states. The 2024 kind of leveling off in those areas, I think, is still a scary thing for them. It kind of does go against a lot of ideas about the realignment or what suburban voters might necessarily want. This kind of, you get to 60% in a suburb, how do you get to 65, 70%? Like, what might that last 10% of people be interested in? Is that different from the people who got you from 45% to 60%? Are their priorities the same? I think that Spanberger doing as well as she did is an encouraging sign in that department. But again, Northern Virginia is this unique area that was uniquely affected by the Doge cuts, and that might not be the same kind of political or like economic environment there is in other states.
Yeah.
So they have a bit of cautious optimism. There's a bit of a reason for that. Maybe like the kind of suburban train can keep on trucking after it had this abrupt stop last year. But if there really is like kind of the situation where Democrats like come close and they make a big surge in Texas but fall short, I would not be surprised if the reason for that was that the suburban gains were not what they wanted to be, because the Hispanics element of it, I think, is starting to click into place. But to get a victory in a state like Texas, you need really everything to come together. You need to have like Trump won Hispanic margins with the best margins with suburbanites and expanding on those margins with the suburbanites that you've ever seen. And it's not necessarily the case. It's still an open question if Democrats can keep on like cutting into Republican strength, because like you can have these really big swings and things can stall out. That's what happened really with Republicans and rural voters, with these white working class voters after 2016. There's an expectation that these areas would just keep on swinging and getting redder and redder forever. But at a certain point, after you take all the really easy gains, you take like the people who are really primed to be on your side of the argument, when the political discourse and debates and the candidates themselves are so static and nothing really changes, the kind of areas that you made a lot of gains in, like it can really taper off in a way that you might not expect. So I think if there's anything they should be worried about, it's not really the Rio Grande Valley or Harris County at this point. It's the suburban areas where like things were pretty disappointing for them last year.
Hmm. I think like the path to a Blexas kind of, if it does happen in 2026, it needs to be like a kind of a perfect storm of this very like
Yeah,
democratic national environment, which I think is already kind of materializing. Um, like a continued kind of disillusionment with the Trump administration, which I think was already continuing. I think a particularly weak Republican candidate and a particularly strong Democratic candidate, which in my mind, for how I
yeah,
follow the race and with my own opinions, kind of comes through as like I think the only real path to victory would be. I mean, I don't want to say the only real path to victory, but the one that makes the most sense in my mind is a Paxton versus Tallarico race. And I kind of wanted to pivot a little bit to like how much have you followed the race in general? Like, are you familiar with who the candidates are on either side
yeah. I
and who
know
has an
about them.
actual
Yeah,
shot? So with the candidates, I know that you kind of put Jasmine Crockett's polling at the end as like kind of an uh-oh statement, like it might threaten this perfect
yeah,
storm. I think that there's like a bit of a tendency maybe to underestimate her. Like clearly she has to have some sort of support in Texas for a reason. I mean, to be honest,
yeah,
my first exposure to her is just is literally just the Hot Wheels tweet. Like that's the first time I even heard about who this
yeah,
person was. Um, I think in some of your previous articles, you kind of talked about it. You know how the quote unquote like the libs have gone insane, and I think,
yeah.
like ideologically, like Tallarico and Crockett represent these two like potential pass for the Democrat Party. It's like, are you gonna go down?
Yeah.
Are you gonna go down the dark woke path and like see what happens and see if you can win an election based on pure like resentment for the GOP and like riling people up, or are you going
Yeah.
to kind of try this like Tallarico feels very old school. Like he feels very old school, but in terms of like his the way he presents himself, but I think he's more in line with progressive policies than like what we think is like the Southern Democrat kind of stereotype. I know that
Hmm.
I've talked to his people on his campaign because one of the biggest hardest sells I've had for people like talking about him is they'll go to his website and he's got like doesn't have a policy page, and so like a lot of
Yeah.
people are projecting onto him what might be there. But I guess my question to you is,
Hmm.
where do you think this primary race will go if there actually is a three-way race between Tallarico, Crockett, and Allred? Like, do you think the early polling is kind of inaccurate just because it's so early? Like, I know there's plenty of people who don't even know who Tallarico's name is. Like
Yeah, I think it's a little scary for I would say like the polling where it had Crockett like just handily beating both Tallarico and Alred one on one. I think that's a it gets to this larger thing that I've been thinking about and I'm probably going to write about. It's what like we've seen like among liberals, we've seen the base get broadly more progressive across the board on issues. They become very disillusioned with the establishment, and that has manifested in some ways, in ways where if you're on the left, this is something that you would like and be happy about. We saw in New York City where this kind of energy kind of manifested and percolated around Zoran Mamdani, who's like as perfect as like a literal cadre DSA candidate. He's as good as you could possibly ask for as somebody on the organized left. There's a lot of energy around Bernie. There was interest in AOC, like to at some point earlier in the year during the fight oligarchy stuff. But at the same time, this energy is also coalesced around Gavin Newsom. He's gone from being in like this kind of very distant fifth or sixth place in the primary polling to now he is in like a decent first place above Kamala Harris. It like and in Texas, the version of this that has become the most like salient is Crockett, where she is like people will say, "Oh, Tallarico is this new candidate." People don't know who he is. If he's losing to Crockett, then it's like this is just a function of name recognition. The thing with him is that he is a very viral. He's a very like internet savvy candidate. He has over 1 million followers on Instagram. He has viral videos constantly. He
I followed him
is
since
somebody who,
the school
yeah,
voucher fight in Texas. Like I've known who I didn't even think he was going to run for Senate. Like I just known him as a
yeah,
local legislator.
he's well known. And Alred is somebody who is a statewide candidate who has like he won a Senate nomination before and ran statewide in a high profile election last year. He's losing to Crockett in the polling. I think I don't know if it's more than Tallarico is, but it's a pretty large margin. And I think it's just a case where she's just somebody that the base really wants. And I'm not like too I don't want to be like too harsh. I don't want to make any presumptions because I think that all of this is very theoretical. Like Tallarico is like also this kind of unknown candidate. If you really want to actually have a safe choice, you would go with Alred because he outran Kamala by 5.5 points against an incumbent. That's a like I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that he's really an exciting candidate with good policies, but that's like a pretty impressive number. That's kind of what you'd want if you guaranteed a strong candidate for your side.
I know
But people are
within
just not really.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I know within Texas, like Democratic politics, like he's kind of. I don't think people think of him as like a loser, like even though he lost the election. But I think there were a lot of people who during the 2024 election, like he wouldn't show up to do as many events as people wanted to. I think the party was pushing a lot more of for him to be a lot more involved in the race that he actually was. So a lot of the like Texas Democrat
Yeah,
infrastructure
he
doesn't
got
want
kind
him
of a
again.
reputation. Yeah, I know he got like a reputation as a lazy candidate, and he wasn't exciting in the way that Beto was. And I think with Crockett, it's just like a case where this is just the kind of style of politics that liberals are interested in now. They made some very real sacrifices, and from their perspective, in 2020 and 2016, they nominated these candidates who they didn't like and they didn't agree with, and they people who they just like thought were kind of lame and didn't match their policy preferences in Biden and Hillary, under the idea that, well, these are the people who can win. And they don't win, so there's this level of kind of breakage from this traditional understanding of how to nominate and how to win elections. And they aren't really listening to some, like the establishment, when they say you need to run someone like Alred in the way they might have last year. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all well and good. But their conception, and they have this idea that I think it can be true, like to a certain extent, where winning elections requires taking like hard, radical stances, standing up for what you believe in, not doing mealy mouth focus group bullshit, like running some like the whole Bernie argument or the Zoran argument or the AOC argument, like stuff that they were kind of skeptical of before, but maybe more open to now. But their understanding of what that looks like can range from someone like Zoran to someone like Crockett, who just plays to the base and is just a social media hype person. And unlike Tallarico, doesn't even really have this conception or idea of how to reach across the aisle and win over crossover support. Like whatever you might think of Tallarico's like progressive Christianity stuff, like, and to the extent that might actually win people over, at least it's an idea, at least it's
Mm-hmm.
something. She just really just brings this just aggressive, antagonistic anger to the table. And I mean, maybe that'll be what plays. I mean, I guess I could see a world where she excites suburban liberals and like gets people to turn out of the suburbs. And she also, like, the anger plays towards Hispanics who aren't too particularly motivated, like, or feel aligned with the Republican Party. So when they see her insult conservatives all the time, they don't feel offended. So maybe that's the path forward for her. But she's just very untested candidate who doesn't like really like seem particularly interested in like playing the hard road of what it means to win in a state like Texas. And she's a very partisan, kind of controversial, antagonistic figure in the kind of way you don't really usually see in swing states. But I mean, I guess that's just what people want now. And is it better than running someone like Joe Biden? I guess. I mean, given how that worked out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, I kind of have like a background in progressive Christianity too, so Talarico's kind of always like
Yeah.
appealed to me on that level before he was trying to become like a national figure, but
Yeah.
I think that he is definitely gonna have an easier time like flipping voters versus turning out a
Yeah.
base. Um, how that would play out in a primary is, I guess, what I'm most interested in, because I've never even really thought about what a competitive Democratic primary in Texas would look like, because it's never really
Yeah.
happened before. Can't even think of one.
Yeah.
um, but anyways, thank you for coming on. Thank you for answering these
Yeah.
questions.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm sure. Hopefully, some of your community will be excited to listen to you expand
Yeah.
on some
Yeah.
points in your article. And keep up the great work. For those people who are listening who know me, I'm trying to. I mean, your username is Ettingermentum on Substack. I'm trying to think what the URL
Yeah.
would be. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Yeah. Is Ettingermentum.news.
Yeah, Ettingermentum.news. ETTINGERMENTUM.news. Please go check out
Yeah.
his work. It's great. If you were my friend in real life, I have 2 gift subscriptions left, so I will let you.
All right. Thank you.
I will let you ask me for one of those. If you're one of the first 2 people, I will give them to you, listeners.
All
But
right. Great.
but yeah, no, he's got great work. He's got a great community online as well too. So thank you so much for coming on.
All right. Thanks for having me on.